Hey everyone, it's Dr. Ramani and welcome back to this YouTube channel on narcissism and narcissistic relationships and healing from these relationships, and also just understanding some of the vagary. So let's talk a little bit about a little technical difference that we often don't talk about. What's the difference between a vulnerable narcissist and a person who's just a complainer? If you have any thoughts about that, you can drop those in the comments. I mean, listen, neither of these are great, right? But only one of them is really harmful in a relationship. But there is a difference. I have been speaking to more and more audiences about narcissism, and there is a sense that people need to know definitively whether someone in their life is narcissistic. And it often isn't that simple. I often say it comes down to nesting dolls, right? So for example, all narcissistic people gaslight, but not all gaslighters are narcissistic. And sometimes similar things happen here. All, with this complaining thing, all vulnerable narcissistic people complain, and complain a lot, but not all complainers are narcissistic. So let's take a look at what that looks like. The core elements of vulnerable narcissism are all the pieces of narcissism: the entitlement, the lack of empathy, the arrogance, all the stuff. But the grandiosity is not so shiny. It's sort of a begrudged grandiosity. Like, why can't people see how smart I am? The admiration and validation seeking is them being a know-it-all during a conversation, often in a contemptuous and dismissive way. Oh, please, nobody uses that kind of software anymore. What are you, like a 500-year-old stupid dinosaur? Nobody does that. And they often don't come off as charming or charismatic, but rather as socially anxious, sometimes irritable, sometimes socially awkward, but oftentimes none of that early big personality stuff shines through. They are maestros and at portraying themselves as victims. Things like, I don't have a trust fund, nothing ever goes my way, everyone is mad at me for cheating, but actually I'm the one who's been suffering in this relationship. I don't get the same opportunities as everybody else. I did so much for my children, and now they don't care, and they want to have their own lives. They don't see how much I sacrificed. Vulnerable narcissistic people are often fueled by envy that comes from watching other people on spots like social media. And this can be accompanied by grumbling about life and other people's seemingly more fabulous lives, or the anonymous internet troll space that is a signature move for the vulnerable narcissistic person. And envy is interesting. The grandiose narcissistic folks think that other people envy them. The vulnerable narcissistic folks envy other people. There's often a failure to launch with vulnerable narcissistic people, and they talk big or feel that they deserve big. I should be on a major record label. But they do very little to make that happen. Vulnerable narcissistic folks generally lack hustle. Interestingly, grandiose narcissistic people actually have lots of hustle. And that, plus their tendency to have a little bit of grift in them, means that from time to time, even more than time to time, quite often, grandiose narcissistic people can actually be quite successful. Over time, they tend to blow it, but that hustle, they can get successful. Finally, vulnerable narcissistic folks are very thin-skinned, very reactive, and very hypersensitive to any form of feedback and criticism. And their sort of powder keg pressure cooker quality comes from a combination of their perpetual brooding and angry ruminating, as well as their quick, angry reactions towards anything that feels like a slight. And heaven knows they complain about everything. They complain about the life not being fair. They complain about life in general. They complain about other people. They complain about other people's lives, the weather, the price of milk, politics, television, the commute. Pick something. They're complaining about it. And it is embedded in the larger victimized structure of the vulnerable narcissistic person. There's also an embedded negativism to the narcissistic person. And this negativism, being chronically negative, is so pervasive that it can actually be easy to read it as depression. In fact, this negativism that never seems to lift can be what often rallies people to always try to cheer the vulnerable narcissistic person up. The sense that if I could just cheer them up, then they won't be that bad. No, they're just committed to this chronic malcontentedness and negativism. They are the poster children for half-empty glasses. But what is interesting is that they feel entitled to full glasses, but they don't want to do any work to get them. They actually believe that all the things that they dream of should just be put in their laps. Like I said, in general, they are malcontents all the time. And it's a terrible way to grow up with a parent like this, to be in a relationship with someone like this, to work with someone like this, or to be friends with someone like this. Now, a person who complains a lot can feel vulnerable narcissistic-y, but there are some differences. There are some people out there who are just negativistic, but they actually do have empathy, and they don't believe that they're special. They just glass half full or half empty, I guess, themselves through life. They say depressing and demoralizing things, but they aren't mean. They may even have some self-awareness and are aware that they are a bit of a downer and may even take some accountability for it. These may be people with a protracted, low-grade, long-term depressive state. Some may even argue that there is a depressive personality style that could be operating with a chronic complainer. Some of it may be acculturated and indoctrinated. For example, somebody who grew up with a parent who had this style. And some of it may be protective. If you complain, then maybe it can only get better. But the chronic complainers, it comes out as a chronic dissatisfaction, even sort of a fussiness. Don't get me wrong, chronic complainers are not a walk in the park. But especially if they don't believe that they need to be treated in a special way, or that they understand that the rules also apply to them, and they actually do show some empathy, and they have awareness of other people, they may just simply be a complainer. Though I do acknowledge it may not feel that it's very empathic to have someone, for example, complaining at your birthday party that they don't like the cake or anything else that is happening. So let's face it, I am not saying that the complainers are a picnic, but complaining alone does not make them narcissistic. Am I willing to take the bet that a person who complains all the time may be somewhat vulnerably narcissistic? It's a good bet. But as I said, you need the rest of the data to know. And in a complainer who is not narcissistic, another difference we'll see is that they may lack that thin-skinned hypersensitivity that is such a signature of vulnerable narcissism. You may be able to get them to crack a smile or even make fun of themselves. That is all but impossible with a vulnerable narcissistic person. So again, the complainers, you might actually get them. They might actually be willing to poke fun at themselves. Never with a vulnerable narcissist. The overlaps between negativism, depressivity, anxiousness, passive aggression, vulnerable narcissism, and particular behaviors like complaining can make sort of discernment of the differences very challenging. However, at some level, and again, I'm always going to ask this question, does it matter? Being with someone where it's so heavy and so leaden is going to take a toll on you. Where it matters is that when the other narcissistic patterns kick in, not only is there very little possibility of change, you will largely be living under this sort of cloudy skies combined with pressure cooker rage at all times. In the cases of the complainers who are not narcissistic, sometimes therapy, addressing the depressivity or the anxiety can make a difference. And even sharing your feelings with them about it can turn the ship. That would not happen with a vulnerable narcissistic person. If you are somebody who is at all prone to wanting to rescue people or wanting to fix them or help them or put them at ease, then you may very much be at risk to meeting, or very much be vulnerable to meeting, a vulnerable narcissist. Because it isn't all grandiosity and flashy, or even that these folks are necessarily that controlling, especially in the beginning. Because none of that's happening, people often think that they're in the clear. They basically see someone who seems a little bit socially awkward. But so often, vulnerable narcissistic folks can often come off as being kind of down on their luck. People see someone who just needs someone to give them a break, maybe help them find a job or a better living arrangement or transportation, or to unlock their potential. That new vulnerable narcissist in your life has the risk of becoming a bit of a project. So, what does the love bombing look like in a vulnerable narcissistic relationship? Well, it can look like intense humility combined with being with someone to whom life, it always feels like to them, they're always saying life has never been fair to them. And it kind of seems that way. They will share that they're really good at doing something, so they're expert at something, or they have experience with doing this or doing that, but that they've never had any success, or never really made a lot of money, or never managed to finish school, or never pursued a certain career. And then sometimes they'll kind of virtue signal a little and say, oh, that stuff doesn't matter to me. And over time, what you thought was humility will end up starting to look a bit more like contempt. You may see someone who might feel that they march to the beat of their own drummer, who doesn't need a fancy degree or a career to feel good about themselves, or a fancy place to live. And they will often be quite dismissive of those things, and it will actually even seem refreshing to some people. The dismissiveness over time, especially as you enter the devaluing and the discarding phases of the relationship, will start to feel more like contempt and disgust. They'll start saying, ugh, college is so stupid, and people who go to college are stupid, or going to work every day, ugh, God, you're so stupid. Mortgages are stupid. Owning things is stupid. You start to recognize over time that they often just appears that they think everything's stupid because they really just couldn't get it together. And all of what you read as humility was actually just this disdain for a world that they are too entitled, that they feel that they need to participate in, or that they can't get it together to actually be able to participate in it. So I'd love to hear in the comments, have any of you ever met someone like this? And how soon did you start seeing these kinds of vulnerable, resentful patterns and start seeing their true colors as being something more narcissistic? Now, vulnerability, not surprisingly, they're vulnerable narcissists, is another part of the love bombing. The vulnerable narcissist will often share a rather sad backstory, and they may very well have had difficult childhoods, but some will complain about growing up in a family, for example, that didn't have enough money. They may have had really, really nice parents, but they'll say, oh God, I suffered so much because we didn't have enough money. They may talk about childhood experiences that were very, very rough, like bullying. And you'll want to be there, as an empathic person would be, and you'll want to help them and perhaps let them know that they are safe with you. It can feel really comforting to be that to someone who has ever suffered. Unfortunately, what you're going to realize over time is that no matter how much empathy or no matter how many caring ears you offer them, they will forever seem stuck in a victimized place and can't seem to move forward from that mindset. All of that sharing that they do on their part about how sad and messy their lives have been may actually give you the courage to share your own difficult backstory as well and not feel ashamed of it. Initially, they may even listen to your backstory and respond in a way that feels supportive. But love bombing with a vulnerable narcissist, although it's not going to feel like the fancy restaurant, fun vacations, nights out dancing 10 dozen roses love bombing, so it often gets missed as love bombing, this sharing actually will feel like deep intimacy, not just this razzle-dazzle getting lots of gifts. It'll feel like something deep. So this is where this backfires. It backfires in vulnerable narcissistic relationships because all that vulnerable stuff you shared, it'll get weaponized against you. And all that stuff you shared, that for the first time you felt safe to share maybe, will be used against you, which will really, really undercut your sense of trust. Now, for people who are rescuers, this is sort of a reverse love bomb. The vulnerable narcissistic person is notorious for their failure to launch, something we've talked about in other videos. And their paranoid and victimized thinking that the world is against them, and they'll believe that the world is colluding to stop them from launching. In the early days of the relationship, you may want to take this on. You may want to rally to solve this problem for them. You may get pulled into wanting to help them find a job, introduce them to contacts, help them find a better place to live, or even offer for them to stay with you, loan them your car, loan them money. The vulnerable narcissistic person becomes a sort of project, and initially you may see a little bump. They may even accept it and even be grateful for your help for a minute. But then you'll find that they don't follow up on the contacts you made for them. They may expect you to find them their more permanent place to live. Or they'll push back and say, oh, that person you introduced me to, they didn't even respect me. Or, gosh, that job you tried to link me to, that is so below me. Or, what do you think, that now that you loaned me your car, now everything's supposed to be perfect in this relationship? And then you slowly look up and recognize that you're the one doing all of the actual labor and the emotional labor of the relationship. There is no grand ta-da in these relationships. It's not like that. And vulnerable narcissistic love bombing also plays on difficult feelings like guilt and pity. You may literally feel sorry for them and feel that it wouldn't be right to walk away from someone when they are down. So you keep trying and trying. You may write their behavior off to depression, social anxiety, and you may encourage them to seek out therapy, and they will not be happy about that suggestion. So, in short, the love bombing phase with a vulnerable narcissist is often a bit of a search and rescue mission, and it really is a rescue dance. Not of gifts and trips and nights out, but what feels like a sort of pseudo-intimacy that happens through lots of sharing, lots of hearing their stories of how they feel like a victim, and falling into a dance of wanting to save them. It's as though the narcissistic person is playing upon the vulnerability of people who want to help people. And you may feel that all of this helping and being there for them will set a precedent of the two of you being there for each other. These relationships don't work that way. They're always a one-way street. So that's not going to be the case. The vulnerable narcissistic relationship, like most of these relationships, is ultimately a bit of a black hole. You keep throwing more and more of yourself into it, and it just gets sucked away. Nothing you do will ever be enough. The world will never feel right or fair to them. The vulnerable narcissistic person will forever feel like a victim, that the world owes them something, that life has been uniquely unfair to them. And that can hurt to hear, especially if you are knocking yourself out to always be there for them. It is very seductive if someone loves being a helper, or a fixer, or a rescuer, and you meet a vulnerable narcissist. During the early phase, you may feel really useful and helpful in a relationship, and that can be actually a very intoxicating feeling. Vulnerable narcissistic love bombing is a pattern that is often missed, and in fact, many people, when they are in the throes of vulnerable narcissistic abuse, will say, "Yo, I didn't get any love bombing." Actually, you did. It just looks a lot different. That slow sort of spinning vortex that draws the best parts of you in, your empathy, your resilience, your desire to help people. And just like a vampire, these relationships will suck you dry. So please, drop a comment. Were you in a relationship with a vulnerable narcissist? How did the love bombing look for you? Was it consistent with the stuff I'm saying? Did I miss anything? I'd love, love, love to hear from you. Now, some people may wonder, well, if the love bombing isn't so flashy, in theory then, I'm not being drawn in by all that excitement, wouldn't it just be easier to leave one of these relationships during the devalue and discard cycle? Not really, because powerful emotions like pity and guilt can often set in. And the belief that maybe if I can try one more thing, maybe one more thing will make this work, that can also kick in too. And also, many people still do not fully recognize the vulnerable narcissistic pattern for what it is. Even if it ain't roses and fireworks, it can still be love bombing because it draws you into something where you're not adequately seeing the red flags. Love bombing is all about idealization and seduction. That may not always necessarily be again, roses under the full moon. It could be any experience that plays on your idea of what it feels seductive, draws you in, draws in the best of you, but also really, really blocks you from seeing those red flags. Vulnerable narcissistic folks also have some abandonment fears and will constantly test the other person in the relationship as well. Grandiose narcissistic people at first may inspire attraction by us, right? And then over time, as we get to know them, and we might start rolling our eyes at them in annoyance, but they can be fun too. Malignant narcissistic folks, by and large, inspire fear. Vulnerable narcissistic folks tend to inspire pity. They lack the shine or the menace of the other forms of narcissism, but that also makes this more complicated. You may vacillate between being endlessly frustrated at the vulnerable narcissist, but then feel really guilty if you find yourself getting mad at them. And vulnerable narcissistic folks are absolutely excellent at being the victim, behaving as though they were wronged, and pulling stunts like the silent treatment. You're with me so far, right? And I have no doubt that more than a few of you are in these kinds of relationships. But for a long time, you didn't have a name for this pattern. You may have even felt like a bad person for being frustrated and angry with a person who was like this. And you might even have found yourself vacillating between anger and pity for them. Well, here is something that frequently happens in these vulnerable narcissistic relationships. And after I say it, drop in the comments if this happened to you, right? They will test you. They will poke and poke and poke you some more, and then say something to you like, "You really don't like me, do you?" Or, "You don't want me to be here." Or, "You can't stand this family, right?" Or, "You think I'm a loser, right?" Something in that vein. Most of the time, sadly and interestingly, they're right. You don't like them. You don't want to be there. You don't like the family. And yeah, you do think, well, loser's not a nice word, but yeah, loser, or definitely not a solid person. But you, as an empathic soul, don't want to say something hurtful like that to them because it's not nice. And again, it's hurtful. So you might end up falling down the reassuring rabbit hole of course, I like you. I love you. You may even go a bridge further, especially if this is your parent and there was a time when you were a child that you would have had to win them over for survival and attachment reasons and say, "Oh my gosh, no, you're great." And you may even go even further and either apologize or put yourself down and say things like, "Oh, I'm so sorry I don't show it more. It's me. I have an avoidant attachment. I don't always show my appreciation." So a couple of things then happen. The vulnerable narcissist is rewarded for their manipulative, victimized banter and saying stuff like, "You really don't like me." It also plays on your empathy, and whether for trauma-bonded reasons or you just being nice, you will let them know, no, it's me, it's not you. Yes, it is. And then you'll say, "I'm sorry," which will end up leaving you feel ashamed and frustrated and angry. And they have now been rewarded for this behavior. And guess what? Because they've been rewarded, they're going to do it again. Grandiose narcissistic people, in a way, they're really more transparent. They'll say stuff like, "Aren't I amazing?" Or, come on now, everyone, tell me how great I am." Or they'll be willing to put stuff on social media designed to get them validation and admiration and cause envy in other people, and they're really good at tooting their own horn. Malignant narcissistic people get their validation by knowing that people are a little scared of them, and they fall into line just to avoid their wrath. But with the vulnerable folks, they get their supply through this passive-aggressive manipulation. Ultimately, you are telling them that they're great or wonderful, or reassuring them that you want to be there with them. This whole thing pushes you into a deeply inauthentic space of saying things that are frankly patently untrue for you, but you may be saying them out of guilt, pity. Perhaps when you were a child, you said them out of fear, or because you want your parent to know that of course you love them and are afraid that they will go silent on you if you didn't reassure them. This sort of reassurance mess can become almost automatic in these relationships. And you aren't doing it out of the sort of menacing fear you might be experiencing like a person would in a malignant narcissistic relationship, but rather you may be doing this because you feel bad. Vulnerable narcissistic folks are complicated because it's not unusual for there to be some other psychiatric or psychological issue happening, depressed moods, a fair amount of anxiety. People who are vulnerable narcissistic folks may even have potentially some more complex histories of trauma, neglect, or other difficult histories. Vulnerable narcissistic people, you're not going to see that same kind of glib, charismatic arrogance that we often see in grandiose narcissistic folks. And instead, what we see is a person who is actually, they're actually pretty interpersonally unskilled. So while the grandiose narcissistic person can get supply in a variety of ways by posturing and trumpeting and exaggerating or lying about their achievements, they do things like flirt and they post nonsense on social media or pursue fame or notoriety or spend lots of money. Whatever they need to get attention. A vulnerable narcissistic person will engage in lots of reassurance seeking. And that reassurance seeking can devolve into manipulation. So to get that supply of somebody telling the vulnerable narcissist, we like you, or you're good, you're fine, it has to turn into a more victimized positioning of an accusation of saying something like, well, you don't like me. That puts the other person on the defensive and gets the vulnerable narcissist the answer they want. Over time, the people around the vulnerable narcissistic person will have a complex mix of emotions, including resentment, pity, exhaustion, and certainly don't enjoy spending time with them. And it gets perceived and it turns into these sad statements that the vulnerable narcissistic person picks up on, and that can keep you stuck in a loop forever. Most people say that getting out of a relationship with any narcissist is hard, but getting out of a relationship with someone who's a vulnerable narcissist is much more difficult because the kindest parts of you may find it hard to dislodge yourself. And frankly, a narcissistic relationship or system is no place to speak your truth. It's pointless, and it just ends up stoking dysfunctional flames. So when they tell you, you don't like me, or you don't like this family, or you resent me, it's the most difficult balancing act. Answering truthfully is pointless and saying, no, I don't like you. But whatever empty reassurance you have to offer, remember at least that it is a signal about how one-sided this relationship is. And if you do feel that you need to keep engaging in it, hold tight onto those slippery rocks of radical acceptance and recognize that no matter how many times you cross your fingers behind your back and tell them, of course I like ya. Of course I like spending time with you. They're going to keep accusing you of otherwise. It's sort of a victimized form of gaslighting, having someone tell you how you feel. But it hits a little close to home because it's true, and may actually not be gaslighting if they're kind of landing on something that is actually quite true but it's not comfortable or even sensible to express it. But it also illuminates how we get sucked so deep into these relationships, or if it is family, can find it almost impossible to ever set a boundary or disengage in a manner that feels healthy. Not about doing this deliberately, but you might wonder, how is it? Why am I so under this person's skin? Like, why are they so bothered by me? More often, you may end up, again, happening this, not intentionally, but because it happens, you're like, I keep getting under their skin. Why? So let's break down the what happens. How does this happen? And you're going to see what the punchline to this ain't pretty. It means you just need to stop by being yourself. But how do you do it? By being happy, having fun, being successful, being lucky, having your hard work turn into success, enjoying simple, sweet moments in life. If those things are happening, you're going to get under the skin of a vulnerable narcissist. So let's break this list out, because there's sort of two things happening here. First, let's talk about the happy stuff. Having fun, enjoying a party, enjoying a silly or pretty little thing like a display of lights or a garden or a festival or something like that. The first thing the vulnerable narcissist will do is probably say something cynical about it, or like, oh, this is just something that they're doing to lure you in so you give them more money, or, oh gosh, all of this is contributing to the end of the planet, or you're a corporate shill for enjoying these lights, or whatever it is. Or they'll complain about the parking or the traffic or the fee. They'll roll their eyes. They'll portray you as maudlin and overly sentimental or just foolish for being so into this joyful, happy thing. And if it's at a party, they may critique the people at the party, or contemptuously dismiss the party or the fun people are having, and dismiss them as losers or wannabes or incompetent or something dismissive, and paint the entire party and the whole event as a waste of their time. It will just be heavy and aggrieved and bitter and sullen and resentful, and steal any joy out of all of it if you let them. They may actually not want to go, and if you make the mistake of insisting that they join you, then you are in for a night of their bitterness and resentment, and all of it will sour whatever joy you're getting. That's how you get under their skin, simply experiencing joy. Now, the other set of things that get under the skin of a vulnerable narcissist is your success. Any reason for your success, but your success. It doesn't matter if you did actually get lucky or that if you worked hard, they will devalue it either way. The core of vulnerable narcissism, which is a chronic sense of victimhood. They believe that nothing goes their way. Everyone is against them. The deck is stacked against them. They suffer more than anyone. They resent, they're sullen, and they feel life is only unfair to them. That means that the success of anyone else is the ultimate goad, and it usually is viewed through a cynical lens like, ugh, the only reason you're successful is you're lucky, or you slept your way to the top, or you didn't really work hard, whatever it is. And they will often believe that there's no point to working hard because nobody will ever recognize how good they are. And if things don't go the way they want, which they usually don't, they will not see it as they're not doing the work or they're not meeting their requirements, but rather that the world is out to get them. So your success will absolutely turn the volume up on the relational toxicity, and you'll really get under their skin. Now, other small things that will get under the skin of a vulnerable narcissist are if you spend money on a wedding gift or even go to a wedding. They're going to say something like, why bother? They're just going to get divorced anyhow. Or you go to or get a gift for a baby or baby shower or visit someone who's having a baby. And they may come out with something like, oh, great, one more person to destroy the planet. If you volunteer or give your time or money to those in need, you'll be hit back with, what a waste of time. What are you expecting in return? Will you expect people are going to think you're so great and charitable? That's what you could expect from a vulnerable narcissist. When they see people doing good, they don't like it. Of all the forms of narcissism, vulnerable narcissism, if you're in a relationship with it, is the most joy-sapping and the most sort of resentful. So you participating in joy of any kind or having success is always going to get under their skin. If you are in any kind of relationship with a vulnerable narcissist, I'm sure all of this will ring true. As always, if there's anything I missed, put it in the comments. I do remember once I had seen a big fireworks show, right? So it was, it was like unexpected, had not expected it would happen. And I was trying to I heard the booming and I went outside and it was really pretty. Like it was just something unexpected, something different. And I thought in the joy of the moment, there was a guy standing there and kind of like almost had his back to the show. And I said, isn't that lovely? I said, those are really pretty fireworks. And he's like, oh, stand there while the planet gets destroyed. And one day you will be mad at yourself for watching this fireworks show. And I don't know who this dude was. I don't know if he's a vulnerable narcissist. It's definitely a bet I'd be willing to take. And I thought, oh my gosh, what a sour, resentful guy. I am sure that the fireworks show probably wasn't great for the environment, but I think against sort of the realm of massive industrial pollution, I'm really guessing the fireworks show wasn't that big a deal. Apparently it doesn't even happen that often. It was a big anniversary in that city and that's what was happening. But it always stuck with me. And as I was thinking about this video, I thought there was something so pretty happening. And I was so clearly the joy was on my face. And the only way this guy could get through the world was just to completely piss on that joy. And I could be pretty confident that this is how this guy goes through life. Very much how you get under their skin is joy, happiness, success, anything celebratory. They will always get that cynical barb in. And it's really, really uncomfortable if you're in a relationship with this. So getting under their skin actually happens by you merely living a good life. Hope that helps, and thanks again.